Wyoming. Winter of 1878. The wind swept across the barren plains like a blade, slicing through the skeletal trees and howling against the battered siding of a sagging farmhouse. Snow had begun to fall again, slow and deliberate, covering wagon ruts and boot prints as if to erase all signs of passage. Laura May stood on the crooked wooden porch, her small hands buried in the coarse wool of her shawl. She did not shiver, though the wind was merciless. Her wide, dry eyes stared out into the endless whiteness, as if hoping something, anything, might rise from it to stop what was coming. Inside the house, her uncle leaned against the hearth, one boot resting on the stone edge like a man who still believed himself powerful. He was thick-bodied and bitter, his face lined with years of regret and resentment. Across from him stood a taller man in a worn trail coat dusted with snow. Clayton Ward, 36, widowed. He held his hat in one hand, the other resting at his side. His face was unreadable, his jaw set, his eyes the color of winter ash. "I told you," the uncle said, his voice gruff and sharp. "She's untouched, still a virgin, fresh as morning milk." Clayton said nothing. "She's strong too, not soft like the saloon girls in town. Raised her on beans and chores. She can carry water, break kindling, mend cloth." The uncle spat into the fire. "A woman like that ought to be worth more than $50, but I'm settling fair." Still, Clayton said nothing. In the corner, the fire popped as if it wanted to interrupt. The silence grew thick between them. Laura's fingers dug tighter into the fabric at her waist. She had not been asked, and not for her thoughts, not for her consent. Her uncle had never seen her as anything but a burden, another mouth that ate what he could not earn. Her mother had died when she was 12, and no one since had spoken her name with kindness. Outside, the wind howled harder. Clayton finally reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. It clinked as it landed on the table. Beside it, he laid a folded paper titled to a prize bull. "We're square," the uncle said, rubbing his hands greedily. "She's yours now." Clayton nodded once, turned toward the door, and stepped outside. Laura followed. She did not look back at the house. There was nothing left in it worth remembering. She stepped down the warped porch steps and into the snow beside him. He did not offer his arm. He did not ask if she needed a blanket. The wagon was simple, a cupboard with no decoration and no comfort. She climbed in silently. He followed. When the door closed, the world outside dulled to a muffled hush. Inside, the silence was deafening. Clayton took the reins and gave a low click. The horses started forward, hooves crunching against the ice-crusted snow. Laura kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. He did not speak, not one word, not even a glance. She did not ask where they were going or how long it would take. She knew it did not matter. In that moment, she was not a bride, not a wife, not even a woman. She was a transaction, a solution to someone else's problem. She did not cry. She did not plead. Because in this world, a girl's tears did not buy her freedom. They only froze before they could fall. The Ward Ranch spread out like a frozen sea, quiet, vast, and unbearably still. As the wagon rolled past the front gate, Laura could see a 2-story wooden house standing against the wind, flanked by a barn and 2 smaller sheds. Snow clung to the roof, melting slowly at the edges, dripping like the ticking of a slow clock. Clayton helped her down, but said nothing. He nodded once toward the front door, then walked toward the barn, his footsteps fading behind her like the end of a sentence. Inside, the house was clean, orderly, and cold. Not just from the Wyoming winter, but from something deeper. A silence that lived within the walls. No laughter, no warmth. Only the soft creak of wood and the faint echo of what once had been. 3 children stood in the hallway watching her with wide, guarded eyes. The smallest, Rosie, was barely 3. Her soft brown curls tumbled around her face, and her thumb rested firmly in her mouth. Eli, 6, held her hand protectively, his small shoulders stiff like a little man. Micah, 8, stood behind them, arms crossed, his jaw tight. He was already his father's son in posture, if not yet in age. None of them spoke. Laura offered a gentle smile. "Hello?" she said softly. Rosie blinked. Eli looked down. Micah turned and walked away. It was the beginning. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of uncertainty. Laura woke early, fumbling through unfamiliar chores, hauling water, scrubbing floors, chopping vegetables, hanging linens, trying not to burn the bread. The stove was temperamental. The water pump crooked. The chickens hated her. She did not know how to saddle a horse or soothe a child's nightmare. She did not know where things belonged in the pantry or how to sew a sock without pricking her finger. But she tried. Each morning she rose before dawn and learned what this place expected of her. Clayton never raised his voice. He did not criticize. He barely spoke at all. Yet every now and then, when she thought no one was watching, she would find small notes pinned quietly beside the stove. Use oak for better heat. Boil potatoes before peeling. Rosie likes her porridge with cinnamon. One morning, she found a slip of paper tucked beneath a cracked bowl. You don't have to do it all. Just try. She stared at the words longer than she meant to. At night, after she went to bed, she sometimes heard footsteps downstairs. By morning, the dishes she had left half-washed were clean and dried, when the bread dough she had given up on was baked into soft, round loaves. The firewood she forgot to bring in was stacked neatly beside the hearth. He never spoke of it. The children remained distant. Rosie often hid beneath the table. Eli lingered by windows. Micah stayed outside long after dark, chopping wood as if it were the only thing that made sense anymore. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Laura baked small rounds of honey bread. She placed one on a chipped plate and left it outside Micah's door. He had not said a single word to her in 3 weeks. The next morning, the plate was gone. In its place lay a single pine cone, painted with black ink in a child's careful hand. She did not ask. He did not mention it. But something small shifted. Later that day, while she passed the kitchen and saw that someone with rough hands had cleaned the soot from the stovetop. Not quickly, not carelessly, but with quiet attention. For the first time since arriving, Laura exhaled without trembling. The sickness came without warning. One morning, Rosie refused her porridge. By midday, her cheeks burned with fever, and her tiny body shook beneath the blankets. She whimpered when touched, and cried softly in her sleep, calling for someone who no longer existed. Laura did not panic. She could not afford to. She folded warm towels, soaked them in water boiled with crushed mint leaves, and laid them gently across Rosie's forehead. She curled beside the child, wrapping her arms around her like a cocoon, offering what warmth the fire could not. For 3 nights, Laura did not sleep. She held Rosie when the child cried, sang softly when the coughing rattled her chest, and whispered prayers no one had taught her, just to fill the silence. When Rosie's throat grew dry and her lips cracked, Laura dipped her fingers into honeyed water and placed drops gently onto her tongue. On the 3rd night, sometime after midnight, Laura glanced toward the window. Clayton stood outside. Snow clung to the shoulders of his coat, but he made no move to enter. His face remained unreadable, yet his eyes had changed. They watched quietly as Laura rocked his daughter in her arms, like something precious beyond measure. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. By morning, Rosie's fever broke. Her breathing softened. When Laura offered her a sip of water, the child drank slowly and then clutched weakly at her sleeve. "Thank you, Mama Laura," she whispered. The words struck like thunder in a quiet sky. Laura smiled gently, brushing a damp curl from Rosie's forehead, and said nothing. But in that fragile moment, something deeper than duty began to take root within the silent walls of the Ward Ranch. And though none of them knew it yet, the life she had been forced into was quietly becoming the life that would change them all forever. That night, Laura told the children a story by the fireplace, a tale about a clever coyote who stole the stars and had to return them one by one. Rosie sat curled in her lap, her small fingers clutching the edge of Laura's dress. Eli leaned against her knee, his eyelids heavy but unwilling to close. Micah sat apart, silent and watchful, and his sharp eyes fixed on her face as if searching for something he did not yet understand. When the story ended, Laura carried Rosie to bed and tucked her beneath the blankets. The little girl did not resist. Instead, she reached up and held Laura's hand until sleep claimed her. Laura lingered a moment longer, brushing a soft curl from the child's forehead before quietly leaving the room. Still, Micah kept his distance. He spent his days helping Clayton with the horses, cleaning the barn, and chopping wood with a determination far beyond his years. Laura respected his silence. She did not force kindness where it was not yet welcome. She simply waited. One cold morning, just after the first thaw, Laura walked out to the field behind the house carrying a bundle of small pine branches tied with twine. But the grave marker there had been forgotten, weathered and crooked beneath a thin layer of melting snow. Clara Ward, beloved wife and mother. Laura knelt in the damp earth, her fingers trembling from the cold as she placed the branches carefully at the base of the marker, forming a small cross. She did not know she was being watched. From the edge of the field, Micah stood silently, his expression unreadable. That evening during supper, Micah did not speak. But as Laura cleared the dishes, he stepped into the kitchen and muttered, "You spelled her name right." Laura paused, drying her hands on a cloth. "I made sure," she replied gently. Micah nodded once before turning away, yet something in his guarded eyes had softened. Days passed, and the quiet bond within the house grew stronger. Rosie followed Laura like a shadow, till Eli began to laugh again, his laughter filling the rooms that had long stood silent. Even Clayton lingered more often near the kitchen doorway, watching the warmth return to the home he had once believed forever broken. One afternoon, an older neighbor named Miriam stopped by with a bundle of fabric for sewing. As Laura helped her remove her coat, Miriam leaned closer and whispered softly, "Do you know you're the first person Clayton has allowed into that room since Clara passed?" Laura blinked in surprise. "What room?" "The one where you've been caring for Rosie," Miriam replied gently. "That was Clara's room. Clayton hadn't touched that door in 3 years." Laura's breath caught in her throat as she glanced toward the hallway. Outside, snow began to fall again, drifting softly across the prairie. Clayton remained a quiet figure within the house. He never offered praise, and rarely spoke of what he felt. Yet Laura noticed the subtle changes, the way he paused outside the children's rooms before turning in for the night, the way his gaze lingered when she laughed at one of Eli's clumsy jokes. And more than once, when she looked up suddenly, she caught his eyes resting on her, soft and uncertain, before he quickly turned away. Something had begun to shift between them. It was not love. Not yet. But it was no longer silence. One brittle evening, the wind lay still outside, and the snow stretched across the land like untouched glass. Laura had just finished folding the children's clothes when she heard voices drifting from the barn. Curious and cautious, yet she stepped onto the porch and followed the low murmur toward the half-open door. Inside, Clayton stood beside a lantern, his gloved hands resting on a saddle rack. Opposite him leaned a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a careless grin. "So," the man said with a smirk, "how's married life treating you? That girl can't be more than 18. Clayton did not answer immediately. The man chuckled crudely. "Must be nice, having a young thing like that around. Keeps the bed warmer than the firewood, I reckon." Laura's breath caught in her throat. Clayton's voice came low and even. "I took her because it was convenient. No feelings involved. I just needed someone to keep the house in order and care for the children." The man laughed loudly. "That all, huh?" Clayton gave a short nod. "Well, that's all." Laura did not wait to hear more. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred as she turned away from the barn. The warmth of the house felt distant now, and the walls that had begun to feel safe pressed in around her like a cage. She climbed the stairs to her small room, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was silent except for the soft creak of wood beneath her steps. By the dim light of a lantern, she sat at the small desk and began to write. "If I am only a shadow, let me disappear into the snow. I will not wait for spring." She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the kitchen table beside a bowl of dried herbs she had planned to use for soup the next day. From her drawer, she took the only thing she had ever truly called hers, a worn leather belt Clayton had repaired without being asked, and the stitching was uneven but strong. She laid it beside the letter. Outside, the sky had turned silver beneath the rising moon. Laura wrapped herself in her coat, pulled her scarf over her mouth, and stepped into the snow. The wind did not greet her. It simply opened its arms and let her vanish into the night. It was Eli who woke first. He had been dreaming of wolves and snow and Laura. He stumbled from his bed and wandered down the stairs, calling her name softly. When he could not find her in the kitchen or near the hearth, where she sometimes slept beside Rosie, his voice grew louder. "Laura!" His cries woke Rosie, who began to wail. Micah came next, confused and barefoot, his eyes wide with fear. Clayton descended the stairs 2 at a time. When he saw the letter, his face went pale. When he saw the belt, and he closed his eyes briefly, pain etched across his features. Eli's voice broke the silence. "Where is she?" Clayton did not answer. He grabbed his coat and rifle, his movements swift and urgent. Within moments, he was riding hard into the storm, the snow rising around him like a wall of white. He found her near dawn. The snowfall had softened, but not stopped. Her tracks were faint, nearly erased, yet he followed them with relentless determination. He rode across frozen fields and through thickets of bare trees until he reached the old stream beyond the hills, where water still flowed beneath a thin sheet of ice. There, on a fallen log beside the water, sat Laura. She was curled into herself, her scarf dusted with frost, her cheeks flushed with cold. She looked small, fragile against the vast winter landscape, but Clayton dismounted quietly and approached, his boots crunching softly over the frozen ground. When she looked up, her eyes met his, but she did not speak. For a long moment he stood before her in silence. Then, slowly, Clayton dropped to one knee in the snow. "I didn't mean for you to hear that," he said, his voice rough and low. "I said it to silence him. He was speaking poorly of you. I thought I was protecting your name. Instead, I hurt you." Laura said nothing. Her hands trembled in her lap. Clayton took a steady breath, his shoulders heavy with regret. "I don't know how to love the right way," he admitted quietly. "I didn't grow up with it. And when Clara died, I sealed my heart shut. I thought that was safer for everyone." His voice faltered, but he continued. "Then you came. Without asking for anything, you gave everything. You made Rosie laugh again. Eli sleeps through the night now. Micah watches you as if he's afraid you might disappear." A single tear slipped down his cheek, catching in his beard. "You brought life back into this house, and I never once thanked you." Laura's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't want you to leave," Clayton whispered. "But if you do, I won't stop you. Just promise me you'll be safe." At last, Laura spoke, her voice barely above a breath. "I didn't want you to love me. I only wanted to matter." Clayton lifted his gaze to meet hers. "You do," he said gently. "More than you know." The silence between them softened, filled not with pain, but with understanding. Slowly, Laura reached out her hand. Clayton rose from the snow and took it, pulling her gently to her feet. In his embrace, the bitter cold seemed to fade, but replaced by a fragile warmth neither of them had expected. They returned home together as dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, the first light of morning stretching across the snow like a promise of something new. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." Spring returned to Wyoming quietly, as if the land itself was careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had taken root. Snow melted into silver streams that wound through the plains, and soft green shoots pushed bravely through the thawing earth. The harsh winds softened into gentle breezes, carrying with them the scent of wildflowers and new beginnings. On a calm morning wrapped in pale mist, Clayton saddled 2 horses without a word. Laura watched him from the porch, her hands resting lightly on the railing. When he approached, he held out the reins to her. "Ride with me," he said simply. She did not question him. She had learned that silence, with Clayton, often spoke louder than words. Together they rode across the open land, past grazing cattle, and the ridge where Micah liked to fly paper kites with Eli and Rosie trailing behind. The world felt different now, softer, as if it too had chosen to heal. Clayton led her to a clearing she had never seen before. It was a wide, open field, blanketed with wildflowers, golden poppies, purple asters, and blue columbines swaying gently beneath the Wyoming sky. Laura dismounted slowly, her boots sinking into the soft earth. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Clayton removed his hat, his expression solemn as he guided her toward a small stone marker beneath a twisted oak tree. The bark was weathered, the branches broad and sheltering. Clara Ward, beloved wife, mother, keeper of peace. This was her favorite place, Clayton said quietly. She used to bring the children here when they were small. Said this field made her believe in heaven more than any church ever could. Laura bowed her head respectfully. The wind stirred softly through the flowers, carrying a hush that felt sacred. "I scattered her ashes here 3 years ago," he continued. "I promised I wouldn't let the land forget her." After a moment, Clayton reached into his coat and withdrew a small cloth bundle. He placed it carefully into Laura's hands. Inside lay a delicate string of pearls, slightly yellowed with age, but warm with meaning. "It belonged to my mother," he said. She gave it to Clara on our wedding day, said it should stay in the family, passed down to the woman who would raise the next Ward children. Laura's breath caught in her throat as she held the necklace. I didn't give it to you when we married, Clayton admitted, because I didn't see it as a marriage. I saw it as survival. But now, I see you for who you truly are. His eyes met hers, steady and open. I want my children to grow up calling you mother. Tears shimmered in Laura's eyes. She could not find the words, but she lifted the pearls with trembling fingers and fastened them around her neck. In that quiet clearing, beneath the whisper of the oak tree, something deeper than gratitude passed between them. An unspoken promise born not from obligation, but from choice. The storm came without warning weeks later. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to a restless gray, and the wind howled across the prairie. Horses grew uneasy, stamping their hooves and snorting with instinctive fear. Laura was in the kitchen when a sharp cry cut through the storm. She dropped the ladle and rushed outside barefoot, the cold biting at her skin. Eli stood near the barn, trembling and in tears. "It's Micah," he sobbed. "The horse, it got scared. He pushed me out of the way." Clayton was already mounted, his face pale with dread. He galloped toward the far pasture where the mustangs were kept. Laura gathered Eli into her arms, her heart pounding. They found Micah lying motionless in the mud. Clayton lifted his son gently, his hands shaking. "Micah," he whispered desperately, pressing his cheek to the boy's forehead. Days passed in silence as Micah lay unconscious. The doctor came and went, offering little hope. Laura remained by the boy's bedside, barely eating or sleeping. She read softly from a small Bible and whispered prayers into the stillness of the room. Clayton could hardly bear to watch. "I wanted to make him strong," he said once, his voice heavy with guilt. "But I broke him." "You didn't," Laura replied gently. "He saved his brother. That is strength." On the fourth night, Laura leaned close to Micah's ear, her voice trembling. "We're all waiting for you. Rosie drew your name today. Eli keeps your boots beside his bed. And your father, he blames himself for everything." A tear slipped from her eye onto the pillow. "You cannot leave us now, Micah Ward. Not when we have finally learned how to love again." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Micah's hand twitched. Laura gasped, leaning closer as his eyelids fluttered open. His voice was weak and raspy, but clear enough to break the silence. "Mama, did you cry for me?" Tears streamed down Laura's face as she nodded, unable to speak. At the doorway, Clayton staggered back, overwhelmed by the sound of that single word. Micah had come back to them, and he had chosen her. The wedding was small and simple, held beneath the same oak tree where Clara's ashes rested. Wildflowers danced in the warm breeze, and the sun cast a golden glow across the field. Laura wore a modest ivory dress sewn by hand, her dark hair braided neatly down her back, the pearl necklace resting softly against her skin. Micah stood proudly beside his father. Eli pinned a crooked boutonniere to his vest, and Rosie clutched her bouquet upside down, humming happily to herself. As Laura approached, each child held her hand, guiding her toward Clayton, who waited beneath the oak tree with a smile that softened every line of his face. "I never thought I would stand here again," he said quietly, "but I thank God that I am." Their vows were simple, spoken with honesty and grace. When they kissed, the wind carried petals through the air like a blessing, and Rosie's delighted laughter echoed across the field. Later that evening, as the family shared a modest feast, a wagon appeared at the edge of the property. An old man stepped down slowly, Laura's uncle. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he approached. "I did you wrong," he said quietly. "I sold you like you were nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Laura regarded him calmly. "You took away my choice," she replied, her voice steady. "But that road led me here. I forgive you, but I will not forget." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes, before turning and leaving the ranch forever. Weeks later, a gentle spring rain fell across the fields. Laura stood barefoot in the meadow, her dress damp, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her growing belly. Clayton joined her, lifting her face tenderly toward the sky. "I lost one good woman to heaven," he said softly. "But God, in His mercy, gave me another, not just for me, but for all of us." Together with the children, they planted a young cottonwood tree beside the oak, its blossoms bright against the gray sky. "Let it grow," Clayton said, pressing the soil firmly around its roots. "Go, and when it flowers," Laura added, her voice warm with hope, "we will know that love still lives here." And so it did, through every season that followed, beneath the wide Wyoming sky, where love had bloomed from hardship, and a girl once sold into marriage became the heart of a family that would never again be broken.